Hi everybody, I'm Filippo Morelli. I work for 20dub as a developer, and today I'm talking about a tool that was created by Umbit and Roberto De Ioris and Adriano Luzio, and it was created to have an SFTP server in Python. And I used it for a project a project of my company, and I extended it so I get familiar with it, and that's why I'm presenting it today to you. This is a brief index of what we are going to talk about. Briefly, some definition of the pysftp server, some details of the implementation, and two examples, a very basic usage example and an extended one, which is the one for which I use the tool. And then a live demo, very short, and some consideration on future developments and questions. What is pysftp server? As I told, is an FTP server, so a file transfer protocol server, written in Python. That's the interesting thing. And it is written according to the SFTP protocol, version 3. This is an internet draft, and so it's not completely official. And I think it got to the version 5 right now, but we are based on the version 3. It's written in Python, as I told, and it's compatible with Python 2 and Python 3. And it's not a huge amount of code, so it's very easy to customize and expand. As you will see, it's basically 2 or 3 classes. And right now, the main application that you can use it for are jailing the user in a given directory, so very basic stuff, but you can program it in Python. That's the interesting thing. So you don't have to go very low. You can use an easy language like Python to do all of this. So jailing user in a given directory, or forwarding entire SFTP requests to a different server, or, and this is the functionality that I implemented in my project, performing some custom callbacks bound to the actions that are performed on the server. So if you create a directory, you delete a file, you can define some custom callbacks linked to the action that is performed on the server. As I told you, the implementation is very simple. There are 2 base classes, and the 2 base classes are the ones that I found where I inherited the project from the creators. And then the hooks are the additional functionality that I implemented. The server is the object or the class that deals with the requests and responses. And it delegates all the storage behavior to the SFTP storage class, which specifically implements the storage, so you can rely on the file system if you want in the default implementation, or you can use MongoDB or some other kind of storage. This depends on your use case. And then the hooks that I will talk about later. This is a snippet of the server class. I don't know how well you can see it. And you initialize it given the storage. You have to define a storage, obviously, otherwise the server does nothing. Optionally, a hook. And then you use the standard input and standard output. These are the file descriptor 0 and 1 there as the standard input and standard output. And then, as you can see, the server runs forever, line 332, and calls this run once method forever. And it just waits for the user input, line 340, and puts the input in a buffer and reads constantly from this buffer. And then it processes the input. Remember that process call, because right now we are briefly looking at an excerpt of the protocol. This is the internet draft, just an excerpt of the internet draft on which SFTP is based. As you can see, it's already expired, but this is the version 3 that I was talking about. And all the packets that are transmitted over the server are of this kind. So there is an integer that tells you the length of the packet, and there is a byte that tells you the type of packet, and then data payload. So the length is referred to the length of the type plus the payload. And everything that goes through the server is of this kind. Everything is done like that. Actions or inputs, outputs, everything is formatted like that. These are the actions of version 3, and these are the ones that we currently implement in Python. So you can transparently interact with these actions. And as you can see, the integers on the right column are the types. For instance, read action is number 5, and so on. And these are the actions which are in a packet, are some packet types, and the outputs, the typical outputs like a status or data or a file name or some attributes, are other packet types identified by those other integers. So the process method, what it does is unpacking some data, extracting some data from the buffer, and first of all it takes the length and the type, and then according to the length it extracts the payload. And then, depending on the type, as you can see in line 373, if you can see it, it executes a method of the server which corresponds to the integer. So for instance, its message type is 5. According to a table that is internal to the server, it will execute a read action. These are some examples of these methods. For instance, if a makeDir action was performed, this method of the server will be called. And as you can see, it simply tells the hook, if it exists, that a makeDir action was executed. And then it delegates entirely the actual performing of this action to the storage. So the storage is is responsible for actually making this directory or removing that directory or removing that file. And these are slightly more complex, are just the read and write actions. These are on the server. So as you can see, the chunk comes from the storage, and the write is done by the storage again. And as you can see, the hook is informed as well of the fact that a read action was performed. And I put it in the if, this is just a curiosity, because this is done many times for each chunk. So I didn't want to have a callback every time a little chunk of a file was read. I only wanted it to be called the first time. So only when the handle that we keep as a reference to the file doesn't exist and it's created, then I call the hook. All the following subsequent times I don't do it. The storage, this is the other class. The storage is very simple to initialize. You just define a home directory right now. And there is a very useful method, which is verify, that in the most basic implementation just returns true, but you can use this method to check if the user has rights to access to a certain directory. So this basic SFTP server storage doesn't do anything else than returning true, but if you are outside home, for instance, you could be denied access to a certain resource. And these are the same methods that correspond to the actions of the server. So if you want to create a directory, these, I didn't point out that this one is the most basic storage implementation, is the one that deals with the local file system. So uses the Python OS package and just really makes a directory or removes a directory. But here you can do whatever you want potentially in the storage and to perform these actions. And also the reading and writing of the file, it's simply using the resources that OS gives you. Okay, basic usages of all of this. This is jailing, and the next will be proxy. And I point out that this is a binary in Python that we will use associated to the user authentication to the SSH server. So this binary will be executed as soon as the user logs into the storage server. And as you can see, the main lines, this one that I highlighted, are just instantiating a server and defining a storage. That's it. It's very simple. All the other stuff is just parsing arguments from the command line. And this is for jailing. So I only define in one of the arguments, I let the user define a directory in which to jail the user, and that's it. All the other stuff is uncustomized. And this other one is the proxy. So I use just a different kind of storage. The server is still the basic server. And this one is a storage that forwards all the requests to a different server. So in the arguments that I parse in the command line, I don't show it here, the user will tell how to log on the other server, obviously. Okay, how do we use those binaries? We use those binaries in the authorized keys file that you find in the SSH directory, the hidden one. And this file contains all the keys of people that is authorized to access to the server. And usually on the majority of our systems, it just contains the key. But you can associate different behaviors to just logging. And one of these is forcing the execution of just one command when the user logs. So the user logs and he cannot execute other commands different from the one you define. And that's what we do. So we put there the path of the binary that we defined before. So if we want to implement a jailing behavior, we put the path of the jailing binary there. And so every time Filippo, for instance, or Juliana logs in, he will be jailed somewhere. Okay. This is the extended example and is the interesting one, let's say, and is the one for which I use pysftpserver. Our customer was a client. Was this HHB project, which is a group of researchers. They needed this kind of, they have a huge amount of source to catalog, like many PDF files, books, journal articles, magazine articles, newspaper articles, even objects, like books or physical objects. And they needed to upload a massive amount of files, a lot, in a storage. And some people had to deal just with uploading, so they didn't want to know anything about managing these files. And then some other people had to do some documents editing on these files. So somewhere else, they needed to have an admin, and we immediately thought about a Django admin for it, where they could input some other information about the files. So I create on this massive storage Filippo or 20tab.txt, and I wanted immediately to have something there. This is the scheme that we imagined that best mirrored their requirements. We wanted to have a storage somewhere and an admin system. And they had to talk and to be synchronized in a way that through the admin you could define the credentials for the user to be authorized to upload the files. And when the file were uploaded on the storage, there would be some callbacks that inform the admin of what happened on the storage. So a new file was created, then on the admin I had to create a new object. Or it was edited, I had to edit it on the admin. It had to be transparent. So we were pretty sure of using Django for the admin. And since we needed callbacks there, we wanted to have an API exposing our admin in an automatic way. So Django REST Framework was our idea for that candidate. Then SSH as the protocol here, and for the credentials part, we needed Paramigo, and for the API requests as external packages. And for this part, we knew that it would be an SFTP server, but we needed something to implement specifically the callbacks part. So we wanted it to be easily customizable. So we already had pysftpserver, and it was very good for the SFTP part, but we didn't have the hook behavior still at the time. So that's the new part, the hooks. This is an example hook, and it's the one I created. So there is an abstract hook there from which I inherit, but the one I wrote is a hook, so it's something hooked to each action on the server, and the one I wrote just does requests. So if you create a new file, it makes a request to the API with the information of the file created. And so this is a snippet from the hook. And as you can see, these are read, write, or make. The scheme is the same as the server and the storage. We have a method for one method for each action that is performed on the server. So when a read action is performed on the server, the storage is called to read the information, and the hook is called as well. And we pass some references to the file that is being read, the server itself, the offset, and the size, which are the same parameters that are given to the storage, passed to the storage. And so the hooks is informed, and in this case, it sends a request containing that data. So I can do whatever I want on the admin side with the file that was edited, with the information of what file was edited in particular in this case. This is the binary, and it's slightly different from the other ones because I had to implement also the authorization part. In Django REST framework, you can authorize the users with tokens. Is one of the many ways you can authorize users. So it looked like an interesting feature, and we use that. So I go slightly beyond. In the SSH authorized keys file, we also create an environment variable user API token with the token, so that I can read it here in the binary, which is executed on the storage. So I can read in line 19, I can read the user token from the environment. I get the token and I use it in the request, so that I know that the user was logged in, its token is in the system, and I can use it to log in the admin. There are some other little things here, like no port forwarding. These are all security stuff to prevent users from doing things that we don't want them to do. They are also jailed. I don't know if you saw it. We use the jailing storage. So apart from having the hooks enabled in this case, we also have the jailing feature together with the hooking feature. And the hooks has a different log file from the server, if you want. So let's try and do the demo. I don't know if this is going to be. Okay, so right now, this is the authorized keys file, and it's empty right now because no one right now is allowed to enter the storage. My computer right now is emulating both the storage and the admin. So I have right now a Django admin, which is here, and there's a OpenSSH Emperor system running this project, and no, this is the home of the project, and this is like a shortened version of the project that I created just for the demo. But as you can see, this is very similar to what our customers had on their computers. They had many types of sources, like books or conference proceedings, as I told you. And as soon as they loaded something in the storage, the new files ended in raw sources immediately. Then they could edit them, And if they told the system that this raw source was a book, it was considered a book, and so on. And among the users, you can see I am there, I am the only one there, and associated to my user profile, I also have an SSH key, which is the first of two requirements for me to be authorized to go on the storage, to use the storage. The other one is the token. So as soon as I create a token, I associate a token to me. This is another interesting feature to do another talk about, which is OSGI spoolers and all this. No, this is not like that. Okay. I have a token now, and if everything works correctly, right now I should be authorized. And this is the line that tells the server that I can log in. So this is my token in the environment variable, and this is my key. Okay. And now I can try and upload some files. Sorry for the giving you my back. Okay, this is a CyberDuck for Dummies FileZilla style client. And let's try and upload this file I have here on my desktop, which is called testfile.txt. Okay, so our customer didn't want every file that they put on the storage to be considered a source or to be automatically created on the admin. They wanted to be created only if their name were formatted in a certain way. You can already see that the good one has a numeric identifier, then underscore whatever, and then underscore source. This is the kind of name they wanted us to use to filter the good files from the bad files. Then they had to deal with naming them, their problem. So right now, I try and upload this file. Okay, and if I go on raw sources, which is where I expect to find this file, it shouldn't be there because it's badly formatted, and we still have 0 sources. Let's hope that if I upload the good one, it will work. So now I try to upload this one on the server. Okay. Okay. And it automatically creates this thing. It looks easy, simple, but it wasn't. And so this is the raw source. We already extracted the code for them. And we are expecting them to say if this one is an archive item, a book, a conference proceedings. We don't know. It's just raw right now. And they can briefly put some notes here on the abstract and stuff like that. We already know the user that created it. That comes from the server. So it was created by me. Through the token, you can do this little piece of humble magic. And then I can tell that this is a book, for instance, and I can save and continue editing. And I can, now it is a book, it's a different object. And I can say the title of the book and stuff that are interesting for the customer. So they could have people dealing with the server, upload loads of files, and have everything automatically transformed to instances in the Django admin. And this was pretty cool, and they are currently using it. Let's go back to the presentation. Okay, future developments. This is quite a new creation, so it's still very open to contributions. They are welcome, and as mine was. And for instance, we are one of the first thing that was requested about pysftpserver was to jail user in multiple parallel directories. So I could be jailed in a directory and in another one, and everything that comes from there, not just in the tree that comes from one directory. That could be an interesting feature to implement in the future. And then implementing differentiating the callbacks between pre-action and post-action callbacks. So informing another entity that is interested in it that a certain action was done and with what parameters it was called, and then what was the outcome. This is another future development that we are thinking about. And then obviously implementing new storages. Right now, I think we have a storage for Mongo, as I told you, the file system one that I'm using, and the proxy one. And obviously new hooks. Right now there is only my hook, the one I implemented for forwarding requests, but any other use case is interesting or could be interesting to implement. So, questions? And thank you, and questions?
Are there any questions? No question. Thank you.
Thank you.